I'd hold off till I'm done and see if you still feel like applauding at the end of that. But thank you anyway. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my journey, maybe things you don't normally see in the bio, and then we can save the rest of it for the follow-up questions. What I'd like to start by saying is that I am one of the more unlikely entrepreneurs that you're likely to see. I'm probably a bit of an accidental entrepreneur. I grew up in a military family in India, in a Navy family. My dad was a submarine captain and went on to become the captain of an aircraft carrier and so on. So, when you're a young boy growing up in that kind of family, what's your dream? I mean, there's very few jobs that are cooler than actually being a submarine captain. So that was my dream. But, fate has other plans for you, and I eventually found my way to the US as a COBOL developer. And many of you are probably, I see some giving away the whole age thing here. But COBOL was not a fun language, and I did that for a couple of years. I didn't enjoy it, and I ended up in Detroit, Michigan, actually, at an IT services firm called Centel, which just happened to be run by a husband and wife team that I worked for 5 years. That turned out to be amazing street-level entrepreneurs. And by street level, what I mean is we never used the word entrepreneurship. They were just extremely skilled at charging a little bit more for whatever we did than they were paying. We hated debt, and I learned all about street-level selling from them. It's a skill that became really useful later. I left Centel because I was sort of lost in a way. After 5 years of doing this, there wasn't much more that I was learning. IT services turned out to be quite a grind. It turned out to be a combination of selling staffing services, which was a lot of phone calls and unreturned phone calls. There was an offshore business developing in the early days, so all of that was going on. And I think when I left, it was because there was this deep wellspring of frustration that had started to build up that I couldn't quite place. And I just carried it with me. And when I look back on that frustration later, there were other events that happened that I'll talk about in a second, but I think I became a student of my own frustration. And it was a very good thing. If you can find a way to do that, you actually are able to step outside the emotions of it and the negativity of it and become an observer to something that others are probably feeling too. So I was feeling that. There was nothing I could do. So you do what everyone does when they are confused and they reset. You go to business school, right? And so you go to business school to reset. And I end up here at Kellogg, which was a wonderful experience. For someone like me who was really ready to, to partake of the candy store, so to say, of what Kellogg offered, I had a fabulous time. But I had one dream and one dream only, and that was to join McKinsey and to be a consultant. Completing the journey out of the unfulfilling, in my view, profession I was in. So I did join McKinsey, and it was wonderful for a couple of years, and then this dissatisfaction started to set it again. And I don't know about you guys, but every now and then in life, something happens where if you're tuned into it, there's a little epiphany, and there's a little voice that starts to speak to you and provides you a little insight into yourself, and maybe a little peek into your future. And that happened to me at McKinsey. I was sitting in the office of the CEO of a very large financial services company in Chicago with my engagement manager, who's your boss in that setup, next to me. And I had just finished redesigning his entire Salesforce compensation structure, like 16 or 17,000 salespeople. I was only 9 months old in that industry and only a couple of years out of business school. And I have this out-of-body experience where I'm thinking, why are you listening to me? I'm relatively new in your sector, and yes, I'm probably a good analyst and a good student, but so as I processed that, it started to bother me because, the answer is obvious. He's not really listening to me. He's listening to the face of McKinsey, and he knows that the firm will not let me fail, and that's the way the model works. Now, different people might react to that differently. I didn't like it. So very soon after that, I quit. And the idea was, could I write my own story or be part of someone else's story? That eventually led me to the starting of Fieldglass. But if you think of what was happening at that time in the mid-90s, in the mid to late 90s, the internet as a commercial tool was just coming to life. So the browser, I think, came up in 1995. Netscape came up with the browser. And then very soon after that, the world of the internet, there were basically windows and doors offered up to it. And it was like this Cambrian explosion of startups, if you recall. Amazon was selling books. And what was relevant to me was that there were two firms, Ariba and a firm called Commerce One, that started to teach us that commercial transactions could be done between businesses over the web, right? Before that, the ERPs, the SAPs and the PeopleSofts of the world back then were essentially intended to manage the interactions inside a company. And between companies, it was a cumbersome process that they called EDI, and there were some other ways. But here comes along these two firms. And when that happened, and this is when I was going through this thing at McKinsey, the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. Because I had that big pool of frustration that I'd been carrying with me like a ball and chain around my ankle. And I'm glad I was, because it was there. But then the pieces of the solution started to fall into place. And me and, it turns out many others started to think, why couldn't we do this for services? And I jumped off and started Fieldglass and discovered almost immediately that I was the fifth or sixth guy to have this original idea. So, so there we go, right? So that didn't turn out so well. And here I want to make one important point. The rational thing to do would have been to pack your bags and go find something else to do. But I was at this conference when I discovered this, and I'm stuck there for 2 days in Boston, and I start to dig into what these people are doing. And it taught me a lesson that has stayed with me, which is you don't want to just study the problem. You want to study the problem landscape, right? You want to study who else is doing what the trajectories are, what their plans are, what the customers are saying. In other words, what is the definition of the problem that they think they're solving? And after looking at that, I concluded that they had a problem definition that I didn't agree with, right? And in this case, just as a reminder, what Fieldglass does is we built a software platform that helps large companies who buy large quantities of contingent labor and services. We help them manage their engagements with their suppliers, right? That's what we do. So back to our problem space. There were people who had taken a purely procurement view of this world. And they aimed their solution at the buyer, and they said, I'll get you the cheapest services and screw everybody else. Don't worry about the supplier or the worker. So that was one approach. There were others who took a purely HR view of it, and then there were others who said, well, we're the best builders of software because we're from the Valley, and we'll just build in all the best practices, and then you should just use our best practices. Now, I'd sold into these enterprises, and last time I checked, a Fortune 500 company will tell you where to stick your best practices, right? And these are our practices, and if you don't have a solution for our practices, well, you're not getting any further. So all of that is a way of saying that I defined the problem as more of a talent supply chain problem. And the lesson it taught me is that you have to choose every word in your problem definition extremely carefully, right? Because that statement you choose then becomes your map and your compass for many, many years, whether you like it or not. If you don't have the word supply chain in my problem definition, the developers and the tech people and the marketing people ignore the fact that there are suppliers in this business. You never said anything about a supply chain, you just said procurement, right? So we chose those words carefully, and it's an iterative process, and the problem tends to shift on you. So that was an important lesson I learned. From that, the building of the product becomes, in a sense, a shadow cast by the problem that you choose. And depending on your problem statement, then that informs the product. It informs the feature set of the product. It informs how you're going to sell it. And we devised our own methods to get the tech crew and the business crew and the marketing people very engaged, tightly listening to everything. And I remember taking my CTO, who was my first hire, Sean Chow, who really built out the product with his team, on sales calls. Right? I insisted that he be on sales calls so he could hear what the customer was saying. And we would huddle after that and come together. And That's how we built the company. And that's a discipline that has remained at the firm. So what else can I talk about? Years go by. Actually, I want to cover something on the first sale here. If you're doing a B2B business, the first sale, is critical because you have to choose a customer that represents your target customer in the long run. And since we were selling into Fortune 500 firms, you've got to close a deal like that. And the first deal we closed was Verizon. And I remember sitting with the top IT person was a buyer, and he said, I'm one of PeopleSoft's biggest customers. Craig Conway was in my office yesterday, and he has something that is further along than you, and he says he'll give it to me for free. Why should I be talking to you? And I didn't really have a good answer. My inclination was to sort of agree with him, actually. But, in those moments of desperation come a different type of creativity, which is you develop your selling techniques, you develop your messaging. And in that moment, our messaging to him was, the words that came out of my mouth was, everything you're saying is true. That's the last you will ever see of Craig Conway on this issue. He's gone, right? Whereas me, I need to make this damn thing work, right? We will make it work. And all I ask you, the greatest gift you can give me is your problem. Define your problem for me and leave me alone, in the proverbial dark alley with that problem. And I will take care of it. Nobody else needs to own your problem. I need to own it. And, there's something like an early adopter, and it seemed to resonate with him. And we won that deal. And versions of that story have played out since then. I think large firms look to startups to see, they test you for, do you really deserve to get my problem? Are you just trying to sell me something? Or are you signing up for this journey, right? Because problems have journeys too. They shift. So I only have a minute or so left here, but I want to wrap up by just telling you a little bit about the exit, the final exit. And here, I want to emphasize the role of luck throughout these journeys. And luck comes in, there's good luck and there's bad luck. And we use that term to refer to an externality that we didn't have any control over. So we call it bad luck, or we call it good luck. In 2008, when the financial recession hit, Fieldglass, most people don't know this, it's not in the public domain, but our investors were long in the tooth and we were ready to sell the firm. And we had an offer for $90 million. And we debated it for all of about 5 seconds, and we said yes. Then the market started to unwind, and the offer degraded to 80, 70, so on. Then it was 65, and we still said yes. And then they said 55 with 10 of seller financing, and we still said yes. Right? And this time, somewhere along the way, I had decided I'm going to roll in everything and stay with the business. But the offer was withdrawn because markets got so bad that that firm shut down its private equity arm. The only reason we didn't get sold for $55 million was luck, an externality. And what seemed like bad news at the moment turned out to be the best thing that happened to us. So there was that. And then when we finally sold to SAP, the way I positioned it is, maybe we can save it for later, but the sale took place pretty much at the peak of the SaaS company multiples. And this was May of 2014 when the deal closed. 2 months after the deal closed, there was a major correction in the SaaS market, you guys might remember. And it never recovered. And so there you go. That would have been, $200-300 million in value just by accident. So when I look at, what I did or what we did relative to luck, I think it's kind of a 50-50, breakup. So, yeah, it's good to have luck on your side. So with that, I'll stop here. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Ted.